We're going to talk about crimes and murders.
Yes.
So, this is not the first book that's been out dealing with these crimes and murders.
No.
So how were you able to pick up some fresh insight to make it novel and interesting and talking about things that nobody had written about before? How did it happen?
Well, I think first of all, we went through a collaborative process trying to decide what crimes to actually cover. Because it's just one book, and what do you say, Dale, about 15 or 20
There are about 15,
crimes?
in any topic that we do in the Minnesota series, which we'll talk about, there are usually 15 to 20 iconic sort of cases that strike nerves in Minnesota. And we selected for this book 7 chapters, plus a gallery that includes some other items in it that talk about Minnesota crimes.
Right, so we cover some of the most famous crimes that I think many of your audience will remember. The T. Eugene Thompson murder of his wife, Carol, in 1963. And the Congdon murders up in Duluth of the socialite Elizabeth Thompson, her murder arranged for by her adopted daughter. And Barbara Dunlap, a Pillsbury employee who was running around Lake of the Isles and turned up in a trunk of a car at a Kmart store.
Horrible.
Lois Juergens, who adopted a baby and abused the baby so much that he died. And so there are some, and the Virginia Piper kidnapping case, and the gangster era in St. Paul in the 30s.
That's big.
Yeah, so we really, we've got some of the most famous, but we've really probably got enough for another book.
You're going to find another book yet?
Yeah.
There will be a second book too, and in this book as well, we try to touch on a little bit of a law and order thing too. We also include briefs on famous defense attorneys, police officers. So we touch on the crimes themselves, but there's a bit of a law and order theme to the book as well.
And as you mentioned, we did try, my co-author, Sherry O'Meara, who's written several of the Minnesota series books and has been the editor, and asked me to co-author with her, said, let's see if we can find some new stuff. So we did. We actually did turn up some new things. That was interesting.
I know you, being first-hand witness, I know you did some interesting interviews. What were some of those interviews that really got you? Well, first, let's talk about Jim Klobuchar and his time in jail.
Well, when T. Eugene Thompson was convicted of the murder of his wife and convicted to a life sentence, he served that sentence at Stillwater State Prison, and a few years later, Star Tribune columnist Jim Klobuchar spent a week locked up in Stillwater and did a whole series.
But he wasn't as well known at that time, so that he was able to sort of be.
But he began his series with an interview of T. Eugene Thompson and his hired killer, who was also convicted and also there at the time, Norman Maestrian, who actually passed the job off to another killer who was serving time at Leavenworth. So that was a very interesting. Their quotes, after having been in jail 10, 12, 15 years were very interesting. I also talked to T. Eugene Thompson's only son. He had a 13-year-old son and 3 younger daughters at the time of the murder. And the son grew up to be a judge. He's now a judge in southern Minnesota in Winona. And
you talked to him?
I talked to him 3 times.
Jeffrey, right?
Jeffrey Thompson, Judge Jeffrey Thompson. He's extremely well respected. And
what does he think about his father?
Well, they maintain relations with their father.
Mm-hmm.
When their father came out of prison, he was trying to sort of reinsert himself into his children's lives. And so the kids, as adults, put him through their own trial. They went through all the evidence. They did the whole trial. And T. Eugene maintains that he was innocent still to this day. He's still alive, about 80. And but the children pronounced him guilty at the end of their own private trial. But they still see him at Thanksgiving and family parties, weddings.
Sort of a macabre scene.
It is, but I asked Jeffrey, I said, how can you do this? He said, he's my father. He's the only parent I've got. Oh, it's very interesting.
Well, no, this is one book in a series of books, right?
Correct.
So what were they? So you started a series. What's it called? And what were the earlier books? And what's happening in the future?
Well, we began in 2006 with, our idea was to do a big book about Minnesota history on the installment plan. They're moderately priced, available at many locations across the state, and I think viewers can see some of them on the table. But we started with a book called Storms, which is about Minnesota weather.
And you know, seniors love weather.
Oh, I know.
Weather
We all
is
love
big.
Weather big.
Well, and we followed that later in the series with Storms 2. In those 2 books, you'll find pictures, and in all of our books, rare stories and rare photographs of weather events that have happened in the state. It's not a book about weather. It's a book about storms and talking about the weather like we often do. Music Legends was our second book. We followed that with Media Tales in 2007, which is all about Casey Jones, Dave Moore, media stories, television and radio from the past in Minnesota. And Famous Crimes was our most recent release. Our upcoming books will be Celebrity Minnesota, which is all about Minnesota and television and movies, personalities and so forth, and Sports Legends, which will be, I should say as well, for Sports Legends, we try to get stories about some of the uncommon history in the state. For instance, we'll talk about the Minnesota Fighting Saints, and along with Harmon Killebrew.
Well, now with all this excitement, where can we buy? And incidentally, I understand that it's really doing very well, right?
The books sell very well. It's been a very successful launch, and
where can we get it?
You can buy them at Barnes & Noble, Target, Walgreens, Borders.
Convenience
stores across the state. Our website is minnesotaseries.com. Put 3 W's in front of that, and they're readily available throughout the state at book convenience.
Are some of those earlier books still also?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely, and they'll continue to be available. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, that's very exciting. Okay.
So it's interesting for me because this is actually, I've been writing for magazines for a long time, but this is my first book. So it's very exciting for me. But it's a little different writing about true crime. You know, it's true. You've got to get the truth. I had a couple of great stories that I uncovered. I talked to Barbara Flanagan, who'd been a columnist for the Star Tribune for many years, and she was a young reporter at the time of the T. Eugene Thompson murder trial, which happened right when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Everything in the whole country stopped, but that trial went on. And she and her photographer dug up the mistress who was testifying at the trial and was deemed to be sort of the reason for the crime, and got a private interview. And she scooped everybody: the New York Times, Chicago Tribune.
And you've got that in your stuff?
I got a private interview from Barbara.
Thanks
about
a lot, Merle Minda, Dale Decker.
Thanks, Roland.
I've already read it, so I can just.
It's good.
Yes, it is. I say that even though I have to say it. It's really good.
Thank you, Roland.